Well, good afternoon. We are so glad that you are joining us in the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture Where Plants Come From webinar series. Our goal is to introduce you to some impressive plants people, researchers, and educators who will give you a backstage tour of the fascinating world of plant exploration and discovery, breeding and selection, trialing and expansion, and release and marketing. So I'm Sherry Dorn with the University of Georgia. I will be your facilitator today. You will also hear from several other members of our niche team throughout the series today, and as we facilitate and manage our Q&A as well as our speakers. So please do feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box, but put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll be watching out for you for those. And when our speakers are through with their presentations, we'll get to your questions in that latter part of our 90-minute session. So let's get started by introducing our speakers. We are going to hear first today from Pam Bennett, who joins us from Ohio State University. Pam is a professor with the Ohio State University and serves as the State Master Gardener Volunteer Program Director and Horticulture Educator for OSU Extension in Clark County. She specializes in herbaceous ornamental plant trials and has been an All-America Selections judge since 2012. She presents programs on annuals and perennials, as well as other landscape topics locally, statewide, and nationally. Pam has also lectured internationally in 7 countries and is the co-author of an award-winning book, Gardenpedia, an A to Z guide to gardening terms. And she also writes a weekly gardening column for 8 counties, receiving the Cox Publishing brands. So we are delighted to have Pam share about her work with cultivar trials, focusing on key steps in plant trialing, including sites, data, and evaluation metrics. So following Pam's presentation, we welcome Diane Blazek from All America Selections, from the rich soil of her Missouri family farm upbringing to the colorful green spaces of her suburban lot. Diane Blazek's passion for horticulture and agriculture has been a lifelong journey. As the executive director of the National Garden Bureau, she channels this deep-seated enthusiasm into leading all their programs, including the esteemed All America Selections, or AES, trialing program. Following 15 years as president and publisher of Ball Publishing, Diane found her true calling in her current role since 2010, where she enjoys fostering a love for gardening among consumers. Her leadership is driving an exciting era of growth for both NGB and AAS, marked by the development of creative and forward-thinking programs designed to engage consumers, empower garden communicators, enrich public gardens, and support industry professionals. So it is our pleasure to have Diane with us this afternoon, sharing about key performance indicators in trials and how they are used to support industry and consumers. And with that, I am happy to turn over the stage and welcome Pam Bennett. Pam.
Thank you, Sherry, and all my other colleagues there. I really appreciate everybody. And thank you to Marie Lane Gawecki. She said, I love Gardenpedia. I love that little guide. We just won a Horty Award from the Garden Communicators, which is voted on by the public. So we're really, my co-author, Maria Zampini, and I are really proud of that. Well, welcome. And I am happy to be part of this series. It's really important for people to understand where plants come from. Diane and I have a great presentation today. I'm going to talk about university trials. She's going to talk about other trials. And I think you're going to learn a little bit about what we do. This website, go.osu.edu/Pam J. Bennett, is where you can find the handout for today. You can also find presentations that I've done talking about the plants in the trials if you'd like to go back and see those. Those are trials, though, that are in the Midwest. So if you're from California or somewhere else, they may not specifically relate. So as you can see in this slide, there are trials of all levels. And like I said, Diane will get more into the details of that. We just both returned from the International Plant Trialing Conference last week, which the National Garden Bureau and All American Selections and Diane and her crew put on. It was a fantastic program, breeders, people from all over the country talking about trials. So we were all pretty geeked up because it was specific to trials. Whoops, there's Sherry going a little bit too fast. Okay, so I'm going to give you some background about our trials. I've been passionate about trialing since 1995 when I first got into extension. That was when the wave petunia came out, and I sat on a panel last week with the gentleman from Proven Winners with the wave petunia, and he had a 30-year wave patch on because they're celebrating their 30th anniversary. So that kind of tells you how long I've been doing trials. It was kind of a shock to me to see 30 years for wave. But keep in mind, wave came out in 95, and it has changed dramatically. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in terms of the trials. I have been trialing recently in Snyder Park Gardens and Arboretum, which is a local public garden that our Master Gardener volunteers in Clark County maintain. And then in 2021, right after COVID, I added a second site on campus at Chadwick Arboretum. Our purpose for trialing, my whole purpose for trialing, is to determine which plants do well in the landscape in the Midwest. By the time plants get to university trials or display garden trials, they've been trialed consistently, and they're not going to send us something that's not going to do well. Diane will talk a little bit about the timing and how much time it takes to get to market. The stuff they send us are those that they want to get out in the public's eye. They want to get in front of the commercial growers and the landscapers and all those people to see how these plants actually perform. So that's the primary basis for our trials. This is an example of a picture of Snyder Park Gardens and Arboretum. And right back here behind the pavilion, if you look way in the back, you will see where our plant trials are. Chadwick Arboretum and Learning Gardens as well. It is a little touchy on the slide, so I've got to be careful not to go too fast. Sorry about that. Okay, start again. Chadwick Arboretum and Learning Gardens is on campus. It's a very visible trial site. The only problem with the trials this time of the year, of course, are tailgating and football games. People like to park all the way around that area, and they put their tents up around that area. And we still do trialing clear until we get a frost because we want to know how many of these plants are frost tolerant. So in terms of the process, I contact the breeders this time of the year. We start contacting the breeders. We give them the information. Are you going to enter varieties? If so, how many? Some companies will enter 50, some might enter 10. They pay a fee for each variety that they enter. And we ask for 24 plants or enough seeds that we have 24 plants. Because one of the things that we do when we finish planting our 6 plants out in each trial, our volunteers take them home as well and try them in their landscape, and we get information back from them as well. We get the seeds in February. Typically, it's the begonias, the impatiens, anything that needs to be started from seed. And then we get unrooted cuttings or plugs, usually around first part or mid-March. We started growing all of them in the Howlett greenhouse on campus. In the past, we were growing them in Springfield and on campus, but we were finding that the plants weren't getting the same start. Maybe they got a better start in Columbus or a better start in Springfield, but they weren't looking the same. So the criteria was just a little bit off to start. So we thought, let's just give them all the same start. They all come to us, same beginnings. They look good. They, however they've been taken care of, both of us at both sites are getting that same plant. Our volunteers go over to Columbus and pick up the plants from the OSU greenhouse. And this is usually about 2 weeks prior to planting, simply because we want to bring them back and harden them off a little bit before they actually go into the ground. So Chadwick and Springfield, we harden both of those off. Now, here's where the difference comes in. And I really like this part of it. Clark County, Springfield, Snyder Park Gardens and Arboretum, we put the plants out there and they're pretty much on their own. What you see is what you get. On campus, we do a little higher maintenance. Campus is the host, or Columbus rather, is the host of a program called Cultivate, which is the largest international floriculture trade show educational program pretty much in the world. And lots of companies come, and on Saturday of the event, we bring buses from the convention center to our trials in Chadwick to see these plants. They want to see some pretty good plants. These companies don't want to see their plants looking bad. So we make sure in Columbus, we give them a higher maintenance, and you can see here, we fertilize on a regular basis, and we also give additional fertilizer if needed during the summer. We water once a week. We lightly mulch each year at the planting, and we do deadhead if needed. And in both places, we use pesticides. Our primary issue, and even on campus, our primary issue is deer They've been really bad this last year. And in Springfield, we can tell which plants the deer don't like because there were so many that were damaged by deer this past year. In Springfield, we don't do any deadheading. We water to keep them alive because, after all, if we don't keep them alive during the drought that we just had this past summer and last year, we wouldn't have anything to evaluate. We only fertilize once with a 14 granular fertilizer in Springfield, no additional fertilizer. And we will use Treflan 6 weeks post-planting, but I have to be really careful. Treflan and other herbicides for annual flowers, they've not all been tested on each flower species. I've had verbena and lantana blast, or what's known as when you put the herbicide down, it volatilizes and it just blasts all the blooms. We have no blooms for a couple weeks. So I try not to use Treflan unless I have to. But if volunteers are going to mutiny because there's so much purslane, then we have to take some kind of action. And like I said, on campus, we use a light mulch, so that helps us with weed control as well. So in the spring, we plant these out the third week in May. We have a prep day. We do Springfield Monday, Tuesday, take a break, and Chadwick Wednesday, Thursday. The day before at each site, we prep. And we've got these boards that we mark with fertilizer. This is the 14. We drop it where it's supposed to go, and we then plant the next day. We plant everything 2 foot apart unless it's really big plants like trailing petunias, vining petunias. This year we had some hibiscus in there, so we plant those on 4 foot centers. The next day then at each site, we go in and we plant. And typically it's 20 to 30 Master Gardener volunteers who come in and knock it out so quickly. It's amazing. We've gotten it down to such a science that we get everything planted. Over 1,200 plants we put in the ground in about an hour to 2 hours. Now, we do have shade. This is the shade cloth on campus. It's a 70% shade cloth. In Springfield, we have these plants that go in shade under a Norway maple tree, which is a rather heavy shade. So we do see a little bit difference there on both sites. As I mentioned again, in Springfield, we don't deadhead. We compare those to the Chadwick sites. And when I do my presentations, there are some plants that may not need deadheaded, but if you clean them up a little bit, you deadhead them, they might look a little bit better. So today's genetics, with a lot of the cuttings that we have, they don't necessarily need deadheaded, but there are some that could stand from a little deadheading. Again, water is needed, no mulch, and then pest control if absolutely needed. Chadwick, we have volunteers who are assigned to beds, just like we do in Springfield, and they will go in and they'll deadhead. We kind of have a list of what we're going to deadhead. We never deadhead petunias. They don't need it. But things like the Sunfinity, sunflowers, a few other things, the straw flowers that we've had, we need to deadhead. Otherwise, they just kind of detract from the overall look of the plant. Again, initial fertilization, and every 2 weeks, we'll do a light irrigation with fertilizer. And then we kind of cut it off about mid-July, first part of August, because after that, they really don't need anything else. We have irrigation system at both sites. So we do 1 inch of water in Columbus. We mulch lightly. And then again, pest control if needed, and no Treflan. So Diane's going to talk about All-American selections. This is a comparison trial. We are only doing All-American selections at the Springfield site. This is the only All-American selection in-ground trial, I believe, in Ohio. We are not a display garden. We are a trial garden. So we do have right in the front of that slide, you'll see several different varieties, marigolds, and so forth. Those are comparison trials. Diane's going to talk more about those. For our trials, we evaluate a block of 6 plants. We do this June through September. Our Master Gardener volunteers will evaluate them. I have 5 to 6 people. We have 6 to 8 people, I think, on campus. Both sites are evaluated. The volunteers have a spreadsheet. They go through and they mark it. The rating is 1 to 5. Volunteers must do every single month, because if they miss a month, then the numbers are not going to come out like they should. We can't average a 0 month if we don't have any numbers. So everybody who is going to volunteer to evaluate must do every single month. The monthly ratings is taking everybody who evaluated in June in Springfield, everybody who evaluated in June in Columbus, and averaging that. Then we take that monthly average, June, July, August, and September. That gives us the final score, or the average monthly rating. You will see there are some that go 5 all summer. Usually these are like the coleus or some of those that look good all season. And then you'll see that some start out good. The cool loving crops start out good. And then maybe they drop and then they come back up. So in our evaluation, which I'll show here in a second, the bulletin that we publish has every monthly rating available. And then we also make sure we can't use zeros. That messes up an average. So we make sure everybody knows it's a 1 to 5 and there's no half numbers. So here's an example. And in the bottom in the black, you can see June, July, August, September, and then that comes up with our final rating. And then we make sure that all the plants are included in here. If a plant does not make it through the season, of course, we'll put that in the final evaluation bulletin. The biggest challenge for working with volunteers and other people when it comes to these types of evaluations, this is very subjective and they have to be objective as possible. If you don't like it, that doesn't mean you give it a 1. So 1 is low, 5 is high. You have to give it a rating based on its performance in the bed on that month. And we set it up so that we have a Wednesday rating and they have to evaluate either Monday or Tuesday or Thursday or Friday or on that Wednesday, but they can't go another week after or before because, as you know, with the annuals, things change quickly. We also look at overall appearance. When we first started in 95 evaluating plants, we were counting leaves, we were counting the size of the leaves, we were counting the flowers, we were really going in depth until we realized that most people are wanting to know, is it a good plant or is it not a good plant? 1, I would never buy that in a garden center because it looks awful in the summer, or 5, that's fantastic all summer long. And if it gets a pest problem, for instance, zinnias are well known to have some leaf spot problems. If it doesn't detract from the overall appearance of the plant, then we don't worry about it. It still might get a 5. But if you have something like a leaf spot or Japanese beetle and it really detracts from the plant, then we'll make sure we note that in the evaluation and we note that in the comments section. Like this year, for instance, we will be noting that there is a whole list of plants that were devoured by deer this year. If more than 3 plants die, so we have to have at least 3 plants to remain in the trial. So if there's 2 dead, and invariably we might have 1 or 2 not necessarily grow perfectly. If it dies, then we have to have at least 3 plants for it to remain in the trial. And again, if it doesn't get a final evaluation, we make sure that the evaluation technical bulletin then knows and explains exactly why it didn't have a final rating. This year, we're doing something new. We're going to be taking anecdotal comments. As I said in the beginning, our volunteers, we let them take plants home. It's really kind of fun because after we finish planting, everybody who worked in the greenhouse gets to pick 6 first, then other people pick 6, and then we just kind of go down and keep picking until they're all gone. And many people will walk home with 2 or 3 flats, and they'll be able to provide information back to us about what they did, how they did it. Our trial sites, both trial sites are either in full sun or shade. They're both very consistent, a little bit difference in soils. But when you put them in somebody's backyard, obviously they're going to perform maybe a little bit different. So we make sure this year we're going to ask them about, hey, how did this do in your yard? Did you do it in a container? What was it like? Were you pleased with it, et cetera? And these are anecdotal notes. These are not based on numbers. We also recently, probably about 10 years ago, started looking at pollinators. We've never evaluated for pollinators in this particular trial, but we're looking at those plants that attract pollinators. Several years ago, we had a series of salvia, and the blue salvia had a diversity and an abundance of pollinators on the plant. The pink salvia in the same series just had carpenter bees. And that's all that was attracted to that particular plant. No diversity at all. So we make those anecdotal notes, and I use those when I do my presentations. And we might, if they're significant enough, we'll put them in our report. Same thing with pest problems. Like I said, in our report, we'll mention that these particular plants had deer problems. Last year we had a severe drought, and we didn't even do the August or the September evaluation, because despite the fact that we did irrigate, things still just really struggled in last year's drought. Just a couple examples here. This is an Ageratum Monarch Delight that came in this last year, and this particular plant lives up to its name. It's incredible, the number of monarchs on it. I've got 2 outside my garage door, 1 on each side of the garage. Last year, I had 2 monarchs visiting. This year, I had 8 monarchs coming to the same plant, or same 2 plants. So hopefully I'm going to be increasing the monarchs visiting. It was really fun each morning to get up and see the monarchs greet me as I got in the car to go to work. It was really, it's a good plant. So this is our technical bulletin. We put this on the Chadwick Arboretum site, and we put it on the Clark County site. And this basically goes through the introduction. One of the things I really want to impart to everybody who's listening today, if you're going to use plant trials and the data from plant trials for your decision making, look at the method. I just went through and shared my method with you. All of the universities across the country do it differently. University of Georgia does a weekly evaluation. We all have different soil types. We all have different temperatures. I give a weather report in my evaluation. That method is really critical to understanding the results. As I mentioned, I fertilize on one side, I don't fertilize at the other side. We might see specific results that we would put in the bulletin if that's the case. So always go through, before you look at numbers, always go through and read the introduction and read the trial information. What's the soil like? What was the weather like? What's the treatment? Fertilizer, no fertilizer? This is really important in using any types of trials for your decision making on plants. And then with our final report, as I said, the companies are not sending us plants to trial to see if they're going to make it to market. They're ready to go. They're good plants. There may be a problem once or twice. We had one plant that after 2 or 3 years in the trials, it reverted back to its parent. It was a silver petunia. It reverted back to pink. We had one that was in a series that didn't even grow anywhere near the series when it was once in the landscape. So sometimes they'll take them off the market because of a few minor problems. But in terms of the data, the companies, it goes back to them. They use this for marketing. Should we keep it on the market? Is it going to survive? What were comments about this plant? Our final report helps promote plants. We want people to come in. When I first started trialing, I was all about this pull-through marketing. Put these plants that are great out in the landscape, let people see them, and let them go to their garden centers and say, hey, we want these plants because they're really good. We want these in the landscape. And then we also look at where there are challenges or problems with a specific cultivar. As I mentioned, if you have a series, all of the plants in the series are supposed to be the same height, the same shape, the same growth habit. Everything's the same except color. Well, if one gets a lot taller or is more lanky, or maybe it breaks in the middle, it flattens out with a wind or something, then companies want to know that information as well. And this is an example how we set the trials out. There's 6 plants per trial. This would be in Springfield, so we did use the Trefland to prevent weeding. You see some Achillea yarrow on the right. We do also add some perennials to these trials as well, but overall, these trials are focused on annuals. This is our website. This is where we go and put all of our information every year. You can go to the site. There's the shortened URL. You can see all of the trial reports in the back, and you can see this year's trial reports after I get them done, probably in the next couple of weeks. But that will give you the monthly ratings as well as the year-end rating. And again, the resources go.osu.edu/Pam J. Bennett, where you can find an example of the talks that I do, or also the talk for today.
Excellent.
And there you go, Sherry.
Thank you, Pam. Primes us, it sets us up just great for our next speaker, Diane. Diane, welcome and thank you for being a part. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say about the AAS trials.
Thank you very much, Sherry. And Pam kind of, what do we say, teed it up perfectly, because she mentioned a few things that I can elaborate on further. So with that, I just thought that I would get started telling you about All America selections first, and then get into some of the nitty gritties. This is our website, and I'm sorry I don't have the URL up there, but it's aaswinners.com. I can type it in the chat later. And this is where you can find all of the new AAS winners. But what I'm really here to tell you about today is how a plant becomes a winner. But first, I thought I would tell you a little bit about the history. We've been around for a long time. 1932 is when our organization was founded. This gentleman is Mr. Ray Hastings, and he was a Southern gentleman, and he was with the Southern Seedsman Association. And I jokingly refer to him as a doubting Thomas. Because between the two world wars is when a lot of hybridizing really started taking off, especially in annuals, flowers, that kind of thing. And so he was looking at all these new introductions that were coming out, working for a seedsman association, and was saying, are they really doing what you say they're doing? Do they really look like what you say they look like? So that's when he had the idea for a nonprofit, neutral plant trialing organization, AKA All America Selections. So what's really cool, I've really drunk the Kool-Aid here. I love a lot of the stories behind All America Selections. So first thing that I think is really cool is the way he started doing the trials in 1932 is really the same way we're doing it now for the most part, at least for our seed trials. Secondly, I found out last week at the International Plant Trialing Conference that one of the first university trials was Penn State. And they started their trials like a year after we were founded. And they were one of our first trial sites. And then the other cool thing is, a couple months ago, I got an email from a gentleman who said, my mom is Ray Hastings' daughter. She would love to talk to you about her memories with All America Selections. So I got on a Zoom call like this and I recorded her answers, and I'm going to make a video out of it so that hopefully we can use that in the next couple of years, and especially around our 100th anniversary, to listen to our founder's daughter talk about how she packed seed for the trials way back in like the 1940s. So just a couple of the cool things that I think about the trials. I'll probably mention one or two others. Here's one thing that has changed a little bit, and this is the different types of trials that we do. So Pam was talking about the ornamentals from seed primarily. We also have ornamentals from vegetative cuttings. So that's the two different types. I'm calling them ornamentals, but Pam mentioned a coleus, and we've had coleus winners. So not all of them are flowers. We do have a lot of really pretty ornamentals that come through our trials. So you see from number 4, 5, 6, and 7 here, the way our organization was founded was by trialing everything in ground. But over the years, container gardening has just exploded. And I hesitate to call it a trend. It's not a trend. It's here to stay. So now we trial both in ground and containers. So we have a total of about 80 different trial sites throughout US and Canada. And then for those 80 trial sites, we have about 95 different judges. And so 95 judges are judging these 7 different trial types. So we've got the ornamentals from seed, ornamentals from vegetative cutting. Both of those are done in ground and container. Then we have the 2 types of edibles or vegetable trials. The reason we call them edibles instead of vegetables is because one time I was writing a press release and we had a strawberry, a melon, and like 3 tomatoes. And I'm like, not a single one of these is literally a vegetable. So we can't call them vegetables. So that's why we call that trial the edible trial. And that too is done both in ground and containers. Maybe you've seen some of the things that are hitting the market recently. Smaller cucumbers, smaller peppers, smaller tomatoes, where you can grow them right on your patio or your balcony. Some of them you can even grow indoors. So that's why we adapted to today and started trialing in containers. And then, of course, we have perennials, and that's just in ground because that's a 3-year overwintering trial. So those are the different trial types that All America Selections has. Then I wanted to show you a comparison trial. Pam had shown you some also. This is one that actually became a winner. It's called Celosia Flamma Orange, like flame of orange. And our entry is right there in the middle with the yellow tag. And this is at a trial ground in Michigan. So this is very typical. This one is in rows. Pam trials in blocks. Everybody does it slightly differently. I know some of our judges are left-handed, so they put the entry on the left and then the two comparisons. Some people like this one, they'll put the entry in the middle and then on either side. Some people will put the entry at the beginning of a row and then the comparisons after. It's all okay. It's whatever way that our judges choose to do it. Pam had talked about 6 to 12 plants, and that is exactly what we recommend. If we have something like a wave petunia that takes up huge, we'll probably say 6 is just fine. If we have something smaller, maybe it's a smaller basil plant. I'm trying to think what else might be small these days. Then you might want to do like 12 plants. With our perennials, we definitely say 12 plants. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the comparisons, and this picture is a pretty good example. So with the comparisons, the breeders choose what they enter into the trial. So for this one, this particular breeder said, okay, I've got this orange celosia that I want to put in the trial. I need to suggest 2 comparisons. And so these are on the left and the right. These are 2 varieties that are currently on the market, were considered very good industry standards, best of the best at that time. This Flammo orange one, they said it was more orange than the one on the left, which is very true. That's kind of a reddish orange. And then the one on the right, it was saying that it's more compact, but it still has like the same number of flowers. So yeah, you can see that it's more compact. And believe it or not, the industry's liking compactness. Part of the reason is smaller gardens. We don't all have a 2 or 3 acre garden anymore, so you might need smaller things. But yet they want more basal branching, which gives you more flowers, stronger branches. These are just some of the things, which I'll talk about in a little bit as far as what people are looking for. So this is one of our trials with 2 comparisons. We do have some trials where we only have 1 comparison. That's more like the perennial trial and the vegetative container trials. Just for space, resources, everything else, we have to narrow it down to 1. Sometimes it's really, really hard to pick just 1 comparison, but we have to do it at times. And then another reason why we have trials is in this particular instance, the entry is way over there on the right. So the larger one with the darker rimmed petals here. And let's say you were growing just this one and the breeder is saying, oh, well, the flowers are much larger than the comparisons. If you didn't have these 2 right in the garden side by side, you'd be like, I think so. I can't remember. I mean, maybe 2 years ago you grew this one in the middle. Did you really measure it to see how big it is or what the flower color is? And does the flower color hold? Is it uniform? Is it stable? So by having these entries in the trials right next to the comparisons, then you can really see these side-by-side comparisons. So that's another great thing, a reason why we do the comparisons. Another one, when it comes to our vegetables, is taste. If you've got a new pepper, and yes, seriously, our judges do have to taste every entry, every comparison. So luckily, we've got a lot of judges that really can handle the heat. But this, in one way, shows yield. So this was showing how many peppers they were getting from each plant. And I don't know for sure. This must have been, more than 1 plant. But this is the unnamed entry. And then these are the named varieties. And you can even see here, they were all harvested at the same time. These had a lot of cracking in. And this particular pepper, one of its claims was less cracking on the peppers. So we do have our judges doing the taste and texture comparisons as well. So here's another trial. So this is a trial in Michigan, and this shows our container trials. These are all set up with drip irrigation. So these are not tough love. These are pampered a little bit because they do have drip irrigation. But for this trial, I'm pretty sure that that's a labor saving means to keep them all alive, looking good when the industry comes in. We try to have our judges treat our entries kind of the way a homeowner would. And would a homeowner have drip irrigation? No. But might they water too much? Yeah. Might they water too little? Yeah. So we try to replicate that in our trials, but I did want to show you a picture of what a container trial looks like. So then we were talking about key performance indicators. The first slide here is all about the ornamentals. And excuse me, sometimes people are asking for trends. And if I went back 10 years ago, these 7 indicators might be different. If we went back 50 years ago, it would be very different. And I must say that as every year goes along, we keep adding more things. So the game gets harder and harder to play for breeders. You know, the expectations are very high. So just a few things, and I've kind of mentioned them, Pam mentioned them. Flower power, meaning the number of flowers, the color. Sometimes it's a unique color, and then you've got a lot of subjectivity coming in because people were like, wow, this was the best new Vinca on the market, but I just hate that light purple color, you know? So we've got some subjectivity in there, which Pam kind of talked about too with her volunteers. They're looking at them, and I'm sure some like some things and some don't. The better branching I mentioned, more branches, more flowers. Disease resistance is huge. You're going to see that on my next slide. It doesn't matter if it's an annual or a perennial or a vegetable. The breeders are trying to breed more disease resistance in, because what does that mean? That means all of our lovely home gardeners, consumers will be more successful, and they won't think, oh, me, I have a brown thumb. No, maybe it was just a disease that was prevalent in your garden that year. The other thing is compactness that I mentioned, stronger stems. Heat resistance and drought tolerance is huge with the climate change. You know, they want to make sure that these new varieties that they're producing, putting on the market will survive. And then when it comes to perennials, winter survivability. And even if it's annuals, maybe it's more cold tolerant because maybe they want a petunia that's going to last longer in the fall and won't succumb. I'm not saying that that's there yet, but you never know what might be coming. And then the next thing with some of the indicators for vegetables, I talked about taste and texture, because, you know, sometimes the taste might be really good, but what if that tomato is mushy and mealy? That's not going to fly. So taste and texture and yield. Even if we're having smaller plants, everybody still wants the yield to be there because maybe they have smaller gardens, or maybe they want to do some canning or preserving. So they want all of that yield to be there. Uniqueness. And I think over the years, this is where AAS has really excelled in getting some of the unique varieties into our trials. I'm trying to think of some of the unique things we have. Unique colorations on squash, some of the purpley black tomatoes. That is definitely a quality that we get asked to judge quite often. Repeating myself, the disease resistance, the compactness, and the heat resistance and drought tolerance are important for vegetables also. So then trial types. So Pam talked about last week, we were at the the International Plant Trialing Conference, and I knew it, but it became even more obvious last week at the different viewpoints and the different types of trials there are, and also the different types of trials as you take a product through the market. You know, it will start with that breeder and them doing their internal trials. I mean, they may have thousands of different varieties, even just for like one petunia. And they will just continue to select and select and select to choose which one is actually going to go to market. And the reason I have the AAS logo and these arrows here is the AAS entries fall somewhere in here. Every breeding company kind of has a different business model on when they choose to enter AAS trials. So they're usually somewhere in between their internal trials and some proprietary trials, or between the proprietary and the grower university trials, like Pam's. But then to go on down here, they literally have trials for all of these things. Last week, we heard about shipping trials. We've heard about shelf life trials. You've got a big grower who's putting a whole cart full of petunias and then want to ship them. Well, if they've spent a day in a truck, or heaven forbid, 2 days in a truck, how do they hold up on those shipping racks? And then once they're at the store, how long will they stay there looking good? And then external public garden trials is another segment of it. And keep in mind, Pam had mentioned this, these are trials, not display gardens. That's another whole 20-minute presentation I could give you if you wanted to learn more about our display gardens, which is where the entries go after they win. And then this was just a quick little snip here of some of the panelists. Pam, I'm sorry, I think you had left already because we did it at the very end, but we did get a picture of some of our panelists at the plant trialing conference. And by the way, this was an event that had not been held for about 10 years. And what came out of it, we had one whole session talking about the value of trials, like to the industry. This isn't even the value of trials to the home gardener, but for the industry, they visit trials, they conduct their own trials, they decide which varieties they're going to put in their retail location, they decide which varieties they're going to put into their young plant program. It also helps determine how to grow their culture. It helps marketing. Like, let's say they're looking at something and go, wow, that flower is so much bigger than the other one. Well, then their marketing says biggest flowers on the market. It gives you insights, helps educate all the way down. Many, many values for trials. I'm trying not to read these to you guys so you can do that. Key takeaways that we had after last week, and Pam nailed it on the head. She said, trialing is complex. It is very complex because everybody has a different yet similar reason for doing trials, but it has a value, which I just talked about. Breeders place a very high value on trials. The trial managers play very key roles. I mean, I was listening to some of the trial managers from some of the larger growers in the country. This group of 3, 4, 5 people really determine a lot of the product that gets into the big box retailers and the mass retailers. So they have to look at things and go, okay, is this going to work for the home gardener? Is this going to be popular for the home gardener? Will they like this color? We had a whole discussion on color in our cut flower thing, and the demands for the colors in cut flowers is really different than the demand for bedding plants. What a bride wants in her bouquet is not always what you want in your front garden. So that was very interesting to talk about technology and advancements and drones and apps and software. That was kind of mind-blowing, and even thinking of where it might go. Somebody said there may be a point in the near future where AI can look at a photo and kind of do what Pam's volunteers are doing, because you'll have a photo taken this week, and this week, and it will tell you, do the blooms fade? Do they deadhead themselves, and that kind of thing. So I thought that was super cool and interesting. And we've decided that the next plant trialing conference will be in another 3 years. So in 2028, we might as well start planning that one. But that was definitely pretty exciting for us to realize the interest in plant trialing and everything that's needed to know. And Sherry, hopefully I finished up on time.
You did beautifully, both of you. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Diane. It's a great perspective on trialing and evaluating these plants. So I thought I'd kind of tie together what the two of you have shared with a little story. And feel free to jump in if you'd like. But this story begins partly in my own garden but also at a conference in 2022, I believe, when I heard Charlotte Glenn discuss a Master Gardener citizen science type project that Master Gardeners in North Carolina were part of, and they were trialing basil, and they were trialing in various parts of the state. And I think that, while it's not the level of trial that, say, Pam or Diane is talking about, this was a very real exercise for our volunteers, and it kind of underscores some of the points that we're making here, that you're going to get insights from these trials that we would never get alone from, say, an industry person or even a university person. When Pam's volunteers take those plants home and put them into the home landscape, when these Master Gardeners in North Carolina took the basils home and put them into their landscapes, we're getting very real information about the plants that we wouldn't have otherwise. So about the time I hear this presentation about Master Gardeners experimenting with these different types of basils that supposedly had been developed with basil downy mildew resistance, I began to realize I was having a problem with that in my own garden. And so I was like, okay, like any horticulturalist like you, I'm like, okay, what do I do about this? This is really unpleasant. And it seems like without fail, every single year, about the time I go to harvest that glorious, bountiful crop in August, it crashes on me and I realize that I have a problem. So again, I look to extension recommendations. What are my options? I find things like, well, find your resistant varieties, your cultural controls, and using pesticides. And I don't know about you, but I eat my basil so quickly, I'm not interested in a pesticide application. And I do understand and appreciate cultural controls. And in fact, that's kind of one of my take-home messages here today. That's where I've had the best success, is applying those cultural controls. But when we talk about the resistant varieties, it comes back to the trialing that Pam and Diane are talking about and our role as educators for the public. And I just wanted to point out, I haven't personally tried Basil Piedmont. This was in one of the 2025 winners. But this is the information that you can find. If you've got clients that are, people that are asking for this information, we can go to AAS and find out. And we can present this information to the public very confidently, knowing the thoroughness that those plants have been tested and evaluated and trialed. And so, again, going back to my own personal story, this year I tried a purple basil that had been bred for downy mildew resistance. And true to my state of mind and the way I garden, I can't even tell you what the cultivar, what the variety name is. I'd have to go back and find my seed packages. I will tell you at this late date, it's October the 21st, it still has leaves on it. Okay, it's still alive. So that's pretty impressive for my garden. So yes, that selection, confidently using those seeds that that come with that information, with that known information. I think that's very important to us. So just a little anecdotal story about these winners. Ladies, did you all have anything you want to add to my basil story?
I would.
Diane, I have a question. I have a question for you. I don't know if I heard this or not, but I think it's important that they understand, like I mentioned on mine are in the Midwest. So reading the variables, all that stuff, you can assume it's going to do well in the Midwest, probably not in Georgia or California. But I don't think you mentioned that we have trial judges around the country and how that all comes together for the final award.
Yes. I think I mentioned like the number of judges we have, but there's how it relates to this is important. And when you go to our website and you look at one of the winners, and like this one was a regional winner, you definitely need to know which region, which I don't think it was on that particular bench card, but it is on the page of our website. So when we have regional winners, Pam is exactly right. We've heard, so I'll give you kind of a funny story, is there was somebody, it must have been in a webinar like this. And one of the questions was, well, how do I find the things that are Royal Horticulture Society awards? And I said, well, if your climate isn't like it is in the UK, you probably shouldn't be exploring those. So the same type of thing applies here is you want to know where they were trialed and if they're a winner. If they're a national winner, that means that all 6 regions said that it was superior. So it's going to perform. If it's regional, then look at the region. And then the other thing is I talked quite a bit about comparisons in my presentation. That showed she showed tells what the comparisons are, and it's also on our website. You just look to closest market comparisons, and that way you know. And then 1 or 2 final things. Basil happens to be my favorite thing to grow, so boy, you picked the right one for me. With that Piedmont basil, the breeder has said, yes, right now it is resistant to downy mildew. There are so many new strains of that coming out that in 2 years, 3 years, it may or may not still be resistant. It depends on where you live and which strain is hitting. So keep in mind, things change rapidly. And then the other thing on basil is how do you deal with it? I say harvest early. I mean, I'm harvesting by like July 1st because I don't even want my basil to get this downy mildew. So I try to harvest it and make all my pesto, and I fill my freezer by July before I go to cultivate. That's always my goal, Pam.
All right. Well, ladies, we have opportunity to turn the floor over to our question and answer wranglers. So Heather and Sarah will be helping us out fielding questions from our audience.
Thank you, Sherry. Well, I have the first question here from Tara or Tara, however you say it. What does it take to qualify for an All-America Selections trial volunteer? So Diane,
I'll let you do that, Pam.
Go ahead, Diane.
Well, so we have judges, and then like Pam has her own volunteers. So I'll talk about the judges, and this is a process Pam had to go through. And then Pam can talk about the volunteers that she uses. So with our judges, typically they're coming to us with 5, 10, 15, 20 years experience. So it's somebody who has to have had some experience trialing plants. They must work for a company that has a trial ground. It's not done at anybody's homes. It's either at a university or a seed company, breeding company, public garden, university. So there's that. And so they apply, they have to send their bio, their resume, and then they get vetted by our combined judges committee and then get approved by our board of directors. Sometimes, we may approve somebody who's kind of on probation for a year and we look at their scores, and sometimes it's easy to get impressed and go, wow, that's a 5. That's a 5. Wow, that's a 5. And that's when I have to call that judge and go, maybe you shouldn't be quite as impressed. There's no way everything is a 5. On the other end of the spectrum, somebody says it's a 1, it's a 1, it's a 1, it's a 1, it's a poor. And then I'm saying, okay, you're being very, very harsh. So anyway, it is a learning process. I mean, Pam's been doing, what'd you say, 12 years? So,
Yeah.
She's got this down pat. She knows. She's a good mentor to other judges who are coming in. We kind of have a loose mentor program where people go, oh, I've heard of Pam. I'll call her. Yeah, go ahead. Call her and get some advice. And we have a lot of training. So that's to become a judge. And then Pam, what do you do to get your volunteers?
Well, going back to being a judge, I will say it is difficult. When I'm doing my university trials and looking at just 6 plants, I'm looking at them from a, wow, that's really nice. Wow, that's not very nice. When I'm doing All-American Selection, I take a lot longer because they're looking at, color saturation maybe. Is this darker? And I'll tell you, I don't think I can give the name of it, but I think there's going to be maybe 2 or 3 medal winners this year because there were some really, really good plants in the trial. So it's a little bit harder to do the All-American judging. And then the vegetable judging also, Natalie used to vegetable judge, but it is very rigorous as well. Because like you said, you got to taste it. In terms of the volunteers, our Master Gardener volunteers love working in the greenhouse. We have a sign up list. So when we're planting the seeds, getting everything started, and Diane for All American Selections, the companies send them, depending if it's all from seed, then they send them in January, February, we start them from seed. If it's in March, it's usually cuttings or unrooted cuttings. Our volunteers love doing that. I'm sure many of you listening like to work in greenhouses, and then planting them out in the yard or in the landscape, and then also maintaining them during the summer. There is some weeding that has to go on. So it is a rigorous project for people to get involved in, but the reward is they're very schooled on some of these plants. And like I mentioned last week during my panel, if you want to sell a plant, get it into the hands of a master gardener. If they really like it, they are going to tell everybody in their neighborhood, hey, this Ageratum Monarch Delight is fantastic. And that word of mouth selling really, I think, really helps push it. So it's not hard getting our master gardener volunteers involved and engaged in this project.
Thank you guys for that answer. Our next question is, do you look at ease of starting from seed versus using cuttings?
Well, Diane, I can answer that one from our perspective. Again, before it comes to me at the university, the grower lets me know this is going to be coming from seed, this is going to be coming from cuttings. They really like breeding and working on seeds, because if we can get a nice seed variety that comes true to itself each year, it's easy to grow, the homeowner can grow it, then they definitely would grow from seeds. But we don't do any comparison about does this do better from seed or cutting, because the nature of the plant is going to let us know which one is better. And like I said, by the time I get it, they know it needs to be done with cuttings or with seed.
Yeah. And as far as ease of starting, so all of our judges either get seed or URCs, the unrooted cuttings. And I will say that there was one entry in the trial this year that people had trouble germinating, and some people were on their second or third try of germinating. And in the end, and some of them gave it some really good scores, but enough of them said, we just couldn't germinate it. There's no way we would give it an AS award, because if it's hard to germinate, then nobody wants it. A grower doesn't want it. A retailer doesn't want it. The home gardener doesn't want it. Now, we don't really have that issue with URCs. Most of them are pretty easy to root. But yes, we definitely expect the judges to observe that, make comments on it. And, another thing is a lot of our judges work for some of these larger growers. So if there's a problem with germination or rooting, there's no way they would ever carry it either. So yeah, we do look at that, and we ask our judges to look at that.
Yeah, we had 2 failures with that verbena, and we were able to get the comparison to grow very easily. Yeah. And sometimes it is personal failure. We didn't do something, but my volunteers have been in the greenhouse for a long time. And if there's a failure, I know it has something to do with the seeds, because they're really conscientious. They understand the value and the high quality of this evaluation.
Yeah.
All right. Our next question is for Mandy, and she asked, do you consult with entomologists about pollinator diversity?
So in our trials, ours on campus and here in Springfield, we do have access to our entomologists, and we don't consult with them in terms of the pollinators that are coming. We make note anecdotally, this had an abundance of pollinators, and I can get it down. I don't know all the native bee species, but I can get it down to it's a bee, it's a butterfly, it's a bumblebee, it's a carpenter, the general species that I can get them down to. But the great thing about being on campus, and I love this, our dahlias that we had this year had powdery mildew. We have a pathologist who is doing research on powdery mildew. She couldn't find powdery mildew, so she put her test plants in the trial with a little fence around them so that she could get powdery mildew on those plants so she could finish her research. Students are coming out constantly doing evaluations. They're counting pollinators. People are coming for pictures. I mean, there's all kinds of things happening from other groups using the trial gardens for their own specific, but we don't specifically go down to the species on all of our pollinators.
Thank you for that, Pam. The next question comes from Christopher, and he's asking, what are some of the reasons why plants that scored well in trials and came into the marketplace, but they didn't last? They disappeared within a few years. What was the cause of that?
I can take that one. So the breeding world is not sitting still. They are continually breeding new things, and they're always looking to improve. And I will say that this is very, very true for the vegetative varieties. In fact, sorry, that was one of the things that I meant to include in my presentation is the breeding timeline. Probably the shortest is vegetative annuals. The longest would be things like trees and shrubs. They take a lot longer. But you would be surprised. There are even some annuals or vegetables that may take 15 years to get a new variety. So having said that, if something is out there in the market and then it disappears, my advice is always it disappeared for a reason. You might have loved it, but maybe it was just for the Southeast, or you might have loved it, but maybe there was a seed failure and they are saying, well, this was better anyway. So most often, if something disappears, it's because that breeder has said, this one is going to replace that one in the market. And Pam showed Beacon Impatiens, and I can tell you that with Pan American Seed, some of their older Impatiens lines have gone away. They've discontinued them because they are not disease resistant like Beacon. So if you're looking for an old Rallariana impatient from 10 or 20 years ago, don't bother because it's probably going to get the disease. You want to go with the Amara or the Beacon that is disease resistant for today's world and for today's diseases.
Yeah, totally agree. I've seen, like I mentioned, wave petunias. The original wave that came out was like 12 feet wide, really big and gangly. I've probably seen 3, maybe 4 iterations of it over the years. And this year it's nice and compact. I mean, each time they improve it. Scavola's been improved. I've got pictures when I do my presentations for organizations and commercial landscapers around the country. I show a Scavola Blue Wonder and a Scavola Blue Wonder improved. And the difference in the number of flowers on that is just amazing. So the breeding is it is nonstop. And Diane, I like what you said. They don't sit still. It's constant.
Right.
All right, I'm going to combine a couple of questions here, if that's okay. Linda's asking about trials for the Southwest. She just says, what about trials for the Southwest, etc.? And then we have another one from Mary that is asking about AAS trial sites in Northern California.
So we do have a map on our website under the judges category, and you can see where the trial sites are. I will say that the Southwest is a challenge. We had a trial site in, well, it wasn't Southern California, Santa Paula, but that company is moving. So that trial site is going away. We had one in Arizona for vegetables, but that lady left the company. So that one's going away. And I'll tell you kind of the general reason for a challenge in the Southwest. Unfortunately, we cannot figure out a way around this, but you guys have a totally different climate than the rest of the country. And we have a pretty strict timeline. All the breeders are sending in their entries to us right now. November 1st is the deadline. Then we have to go through about a 3-week process of deciding which comparisons. Then we have to order the comparisons from the other breeding companies. Then we finally send them out. So for example, we typically won't get the seed in this office and ready to send out until about Christmas time. Well, if you're in Arizona, you needed to start that like 3 months ago. And a similar problem exists down in Miami. We do have a trial site in Miami. They can work with, as long as they're short crop annuals, a little bit better. So I will say the Southwest is a bit of a challenge. We do have trial sites in Texas, a couple of them in Texas. I know that's not the same as Arizona, New Mexico, Utah. We've got Northern Utah. We don't have Southern Utah or Nevada at all. So, yeah, that's a little bit of a challenge for pretty much all of our crops. As far as Northern California, yes, we do have quite a few trial sites in Northern California, from basically Salinas on north up to Woodland. We probably have 6 or 7 trial sites.
And while
And the
we're
other
talking
thing-
about trial sites, there's another question here about Mount Cuba in Delaware at the Botanical Garden there, which evaluates many cultivars of a species. They're asking, is there anything similar to this site in the southeast? If that makes sense.
Yeah, actually, Sam from Mount Cuba was at our conference last week, and he's a very good presenter. They're unique, and he says we're unique, and we test just for this local area. They specialize in perennials and natives, but to my knowledge, Pam, I don't think really their trial is replicated anywhere else in North America.
Which again is why if you go to their information, Richard Hockey from the Chicago Botanic Garden was there. They again look at the method. You know, if that method, if that soil, if it meets kind of what you have, you might be okay growing it based on what you see in the trial results. But it's so variable. And Diane, I have to give Diane credit. She has been a great leader for All American Selections, because years ago we didn't have regional winners. We would all dump our scores into one and it'd either get a gold medal or not. But as she saw, you know, the regions, now we have regional winners, which are really important because we are all very different.
And that's so true, especially with the perennials. We're finding that with the perennials and also with vegetables. And I'll tell you a little story that led us to that. We had a celery entry one time. I've never tried to grow celery, but if you have, I understand it's kind of difficult. You need the right climate. And so the people in the right region was like, wow, this is the best celery ever. It was so easy to grow and blah, 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 blah. Well, we couldn't name it a winner because it was only in one region. And that's when we were kind of had our V8 moment of, we need some regional winners. You know, you look at cuisine, there's a reason why certain vegetables are popular in certain regions because you can't grow them in other regions. So thus, that's why we have our regional winners, which are true for the perennials. And like Pam mentioned, you know, Richard here in the Chicagoland area, and then Sam out in Delaware, they're trialing for their regions. So you have to know your growing climate, your growing conditions, and see if they match up.
This is interesting, and this comes from Carolyn, and she says that 25% of the population has more taste buds than the norm, which makes many foods taste really bitter. These people are known as super tasters. Do you have any super tasters among your taste judges?
Okay, I love that question. And our judge application does not ask if they're a super taster. So I'm not really sure about that. I love the question, but we've never asked that. I would be a little fearful because if they're a super taster, does that mean that they would taste the heat more? I don't know. Maybe those are the people that can taste all those citrus notes and everything under the heat. But yeah, that's interesting.
Cassie T is asking, how would I find information about trialing plants in the desert Southwest? I'm in Maricopa County, Arizona, and we get so many questions about appropriate plants and lots of people moving here from elsewhere and failing at gardening here.
Pam, do you know Noelle Johnson from Arizona?
I do not.
Okay, so she has a couple of books about gardening in the Southwest that are very good. I think she's won some awards, like Pam just won for hers. There are a couple of public gardens. And I'm trying to think. I think the Tucson Botanic Garden, I'm not there very often, so I'm not as familiar with it. But I would just try to put out some feelers. Look up Noelle Johnson. Maybe connect with her on social media. She would probably know of some sites. You probably will be able to find vegetable trialing sites. I'm not sure how many annual trialing sites you'd be able to find in that region because you're wanting to probably grow more cactus and natives and stuff like that, and maybe not so many annuals.
Green Prophet had an article in March. I just Googled the climate ready plant trials, 6 universities, nurseries, and breeding experts, California, Utah, Arizona, Oregon, and Washington. With a comprehensive scope, the multi-year study started in 2020. So it's called the Climate Ready Plant Trial. So you might do a search for that.
And then Plant Select, now that's more Colorado mountain ranges. And I think they are only, so they're kind of like Mount Cuba. They're trialing in Colorado. I don't think they trial in Arizona, New Mexico, but they're definitely trialing more for mountain range plants. So you never know. You may find something in your local area that we're not aware of.
And look at the universities too. See if any of the universities are doing their own trials.
The University of New Mexico, I know, is dealing with a lot of peppers. We have an ornamental pepper from them. So right off the bat, I'm going to say ornamental peppers for an annual would probably be good.
All right. Well, those are some really great questions. Thank you, ladies. Thank you to the whole team there. It's always interesting to, to hear what's on our mind and what we're thinking about. So as we wrap up our session today, thank you, Pam. Thank you, Diane, so much for sharing with us this afternoon. We've certainly taken home some key ideas here. The importance of that trialing, that evaluation process, as we talk about that whole perspective, as we zoom out, we look at that whole process, where our plants come from and how they come to market. So we know that plant trialing is essential to success. We've had multiple examples today of trialing at different levels for different purposes by different audiences, and just that we need that information, that we will just not know what we don't even know, right? If we haven't grown those plants in a variety of conditions, and that singular perspective is not enough. That it's not just about what the breeder realizes or observes, or what the producer observes, but it's what we get from these multiple perspectives, these various trial gardens that test these plants and these varieties. So as master gardeners, our audience online today, we are educators, we are representing Extension, and we are a big part of sharing this information forward with the community, with the broader gardening public. So it is our responsibility to stay informed, to know what and when and where and why and how and all of that, where to get those latest details on those latest plant introductions. So, staying abreast of those announcements and those trialing results, so that you do know who those winners are and can share that in your columns and your blogs and your social media. And maybe you do have a display garden and you're incorporating those materials there as well. So again, we have a valuable role as Extension educators in promoting those winners and getting that plant material to the gardening public. So I thank you again, ladies, for being a part of our third webinar in the Where Plants Come From series. We are delighted to share with our audience that, as just a reminder, we are recording these series and we'll be making them available. You've been receiving emails usually about Thursday and on Monday/Tuesday morning. So these give you those links and reminders for the next session. So be sure to watch out for that in your email box. Maybe check your junk mail box if you don't see it immediately. And we're going to be here in the same place next Tuesday, the 28th of October, for the final webinar in the series, where we're going to land the plane, so to speak. We are going to be looking at how those plants actually get to market. So really examining the marketing side of our new garden plants. So I hope that you will join us. Thanks so much for being a part of our series today, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you,
Thank
Pam.
you.
Thank you, Diane.
Thanks, Diane. It was fun.